Hello, let's go ahead and learn us some 2-3. We're going to learn how to graph equations of lines, which sounds pretty exciting. At the end, you'll be able to say, I can graph linear equations in slope-intercept form. If you're trying to remember what that is, it looks like this. It is creatively called slope-intercept form because the m represents the slope and the b represents the y-intercept, meaning where that is going to cross the x-axis. So easy. Okay, how about standard form? Not as obvious. That's this one. And that one's kind of a tricky one to graph, so we'll deal with that later. Let's do what we know how to do. Now, this is ironic. It says do not lose the parent function sheet, but you don't have one, so don't worry about losing it. We are fancy now, and so instead of writing y equals x, that was like so last year, now we're going to write f of x because we're starting to deal with function notation. So this would be the equivalent of 1x plus 0 if you wrote it in true slope-intercept form, making my slope 1 and my y-intercept, this b value, of 0. So I know that it will cross at 0, 0 and have a slope of 1. If you remember, slope is rise over run, and so when it's positive, we would be looking at 1 up and then 1 over. So up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. If you want to plug in numbers, if I plugged in -1 and y equals x, I'm going to get -1. 0 turns to 0, 1 turns to 1, and so on. So I can plot a couple of points in that older kind of way, or what I prefer to do is I start to think I don't want to have to plot points, so I'm going to use this as my starting point. Where am I going to write this? When I do y equals mx plus b, this is where I start. So I'm going to start, in this case, at 0 on the y-axis. And then this is how I move. So I'm going to count up 1, over 1, up 1, over 1, up 1, over 1. And because I'm really bad at drawing lines, I'm going to give myself a whole bunch of dots in a row so that when I go to connect them, they make a line. It's going to be really important that you have the right crossing point and the accurate slope, because when I look at them, I want to be able to see what I'm doing. So domain and range, again, we're going to start looking at domain and range. It's always the trickiest thing. We're working on that in pre-calc as well. That tells you how far to the left it goes. Well, since this arrow goes forever to the left, it goes to -infinity. And you can never get there, so I'm not going to put or equal to. On the right, it also goes forever to the right, so that's going to be positive infinity. The range is from top to bottom, so if I'm, from bottom to top, if I look at that, this goes down forever, so again, -infinity, and it goes up forever on the right, so again, positive infinity. Using y this time because domain talks about x, range talks about y's. So our special cases are the horizontal. Horizontal lines, there is no such thing as y equals mx plus b, and people try to fit it into that category, but you can't. They are special lines. They are kind of unique situations. I always think of it this way. The ones that show both x and y in the equation, that's going to be for the oblique lines that we talked about in yesterday's notes. Horizontal and vertical are not oblique. So what you're going to see in the equation is you're going to see the axis that it crosses and where it crosses. So that's going to be the axis crossed, and that is going to be where. Because if you think of a horizontal line, it's going to only cross the y-axis. In this case, at -1, 2, 3, 4, a horizontal line will never cross the x-axis. And so it's always going to have an equation that says I cross the y-axis only at -4 versus these oblique lines which cross both, so you get both an x and a y in your equation. That's kind of just how I remember it, is that the letters you see tell you which axes it will cross. Keeping in mind that the slope of this line is going to be 0, which we talked about yesterday as well. Yesterday we talked about how the slope here is undefined because you can't have a roof that's straight up and down. And so again, if you think with that same process, this is going to be my axis crossed, and this is going to be where it crosses. Here's the x-axis. So if I cross that at 3, then yes, a vertical line, that's all it's going to do. It's never going to cross the y-axis because it's vertical, so it's parallel to that. So I say what axis it crosses and where. So the beauty of these is that there's typically no math. You don't have to do everything we learned to do to get our mx plus b equations. You just have to realize that these are sort of a special case, and you just carry on and say, oh, this one's only going to cross the x at 3 or the y at -4. So the sooner you can recognize those, the easier your life will be. All right, let's bust through some of these. Kind of feeling like purple pen. So again, this is where I start on the y, and then this is how I move. And in this case with the negative, I'm going to be moving down 4 over 3. And this one's oblique. I'm going to see both equations, it's going to cross both axes because this is fancy y and here's an x, so I can see them both. So I start at +2 on my axis, on the y-axis, and from there I count down 1, 2, 3, 4, over to the right 3. And you always go over to the right like you were writing a line from left to right. Down 1, 2, 3, 4, over 1, 2, 3. And then if you need to go back, because like I said, I'm really bad at drawing lines, I'm going to go the total opposite. I'm going to go back 3 and up 1, 2, 3, 4 to kind of that previous point. Then I'm going to do my best job to connect these. If you have a straight edge and you're doing your homework on paper, that'll come in super handy here. All right, taking a look at this, if I like to think of it as y equals x minus 5, then I'm going to be starting here. And my slope is 1, so I'll go up 1 over 1. So starting at -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to go up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, and that is going to be, oops, that's pretty bad. I'm going to make my dots bigger. That's going to be my line. All right, so here, this is where you have to go, wait, this is weird. Any of these h of x, g of x, f of x, those all represent y. So here's where you go, hey, I don't have to do anything really tricky. I see that this is only going to cross the y at -1, 2, 3, 4, and the only way that it will only cross the y is if that thing is horizontal. So recognize those examples. Those are the favorite things to get wrong on this. All right, so standard form is bleh. It doesn't help us with anything. It's not obvious what an intercept is. It's not obvious what the slope is. It doesn't give us any straight out information. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the x-intercept. So in order to cross the x-axis, you're going to have a number in the x position, but you're going to have a 0 on the y, because the whole reason you're sitting there on the x-axis is that you don't go up or down. Similarly, to locate the y-intercept, we're going to have to look at how do I land on the y? Well, I don't go right or left, I just go up or down. So to get the x-intercept, I'm actually going to have a number in x and a 0 in y. To get the y-intercept, I'm going to have a number in y and a 0 in x. So once I have 2 points, I can just connect them and then have my line. But I got to get those 2 points. So don't make this harder than it is. What I like to do is I just make myself a table. So I'm going to kind of ignore these notes right now for a minute. I make myself a table with 0 for x and then a 0 for y. So I think, okay, if I took this equation, I'm going to look for, like up here, the x-axis, the x-intercept. I'm going to have a number for x but a 0 for y. So to find my x-intercept, I put in y equals 0 to this equation. So all I'd have left is that -2x equals 12, because if y equals 0, that's gone. Mathematically, it disappears. Okay, solving that by dividing by 2, -2, I find out that that will cross the x-axis at -6. For my y-intercept, I have to put in an x equals 0, leaving, if I get rid of the x part, 4y equals 12. Dividing by 4, I get a y-intercept of 3. So if I connect 0, 3, and then -6, 0, and if I connect those in a line, then I can be done graphing my standard form equation. So I'm just focusing on 1 point at a time. So let's try that again. I'm going to throw my table down here, 0 in each corner. If I put a 0 in for x, that's going to be my y-intercept. That will leave me with -y equals 18, so y equals -2. Over here, if I do the same thing for my x-intercept, then I'm going to cross off the y part, because if y is 0, negative 9 times 0 disappears, and I'll just have this left to solve. So my x value would have to be 6. So if I connect 0, negative 2 to positive 6, 0, I can connect those points and have my line. All right, same thing here. Just let's try to go pretty quickly and think, okay, if I'm going to do this, 0 here, 0 here, if I cross off the x because it's 0, thinking in my head, ooh, that's kind of hot garbage. That one turns out to be 28 over 8. That's going to reduce to 7 halves, or 3.5. And then if I put a 0 in for the y, that's going to get rid of this part, and that's going to connect at 14. So that's kind of ugly. But over here, oh, that's awesome. 14 zeros like way super far off of my paper. So I'm going to count by twos. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So this is going to be by twos simply because of necessity. And then here, if I go 0, 1, 2, 3.5, I'm going to be right about there. So my line's going to come down that way. And in reality, in reality, it wouldn't be that steep because my 14 in real life would be way over there. But you know what? We're improvising. Okay, let's see how much of these we really need to know. Okay, so the body length L in inches of a walrus can be modeled by this. Okay, that's just an equation. Describe what the slope and y-intercept represent. Okay, so I know that this one's going to start at 42 in my graph, and it's going to go up 5 over 1. I'm talking about the body length, which is the y, modeled by that, where x is the cat's age in months. So across the bottom, I'll have my months, and up the side, I'm going to have my L in inches. Okay, since I'm starting at 42 and going up by 5s, I'm probably going to have to count by like 5s or 10s. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. So this one's going to be by 10s. This one is months, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm just going to go by months. So here, I know that I'm starting at 42 at 0. So 10, 20, 30, 42-ish. And then I'm going to go up 5 for every year, which would be 10 for every 2. So I'm going to jump up 10 over 2, just because 10 is easier to count since I'm counting by 10s. I'm going to go up 10 again over 2. And so in this case, I'm going to get something that kind of goes like that. And I don't actually extend backwards because it doesn't make sense to have negative months. So let's describe what the slope and the y-intercept mean. My slope is going to be 5. And what that's telling me, slope always tells you y per x. So in this case, my y is representing length per, and then my x is representing months. So it's the length that they grow, or the length that they are per month. How about the y-intercept? Well, my b is 42, and that always represents like your start value. And so that would basically, in this case, mean that length when x is 0, so 0 months, so length at birth. Alrighty then. Use the model, meaning the equation, to calculate the bod length, which I guess is body length, that's 7 months old. So since x is going to be my months, I'm plugging in a 7 for x. So I'm going to say the length at 7 months is 5 times 7 plus 42, so 77 inches. All right then. That's going to be my answer per the equation. Here it's saying use the graph to estimate at 7 months. So if this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I go on up here, and then I go on over here, and I'm counting by tens, this is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. I'm coming out right around 80 inches, which I can live with as a graphing estimate since my calculation says it's 77 inches. So I'm pretty darn close. So take that information, take it to the 2-3 worksheet, keeping in mind that I believe on the 2-3 worksheet, you're doing 1 through 20.